Please be seated. In this, its 8th edition, the lecture series is conducted to pay tribute to General K.S. Thimayya, Padma Bhushan, DSO, ADC, Chief of the Army Staff from 8th May 1957 to 7th May 1961, and Old Cottonian 1914 to 1918, by inviting a distinguished old boy of the General's old school to deliver an oration to a distinguished audience such as yourselves. Over the past 7 lectures, we have sought to bring you speakers of eminence, sharing their thoughts and experiences and provoking thought amongst their listeners. In the process, we have also been able to uncover many dimensions of the late General himself and continue to do so. The many tributes and reminiscences that our speakers, patrons, and guests have shared have truly reinforced our belief that indeed we are celebrating a life that was special and continues to be an inspiration. But General Thimayya did not inspire only by his soldiering. I was reading an incident in Major K.C. Praval's seminal book, The Indian Army After Independence, when Timi Sahib was the Chief of the Army Staff, and the taps in New Delhi ran dry because of a sudden change in the flow of the river Yamuna. When the municipal authorities were unable to solve the problem over 3 to 4 days, the General had had enough. He called one of his officers, Lieutenant Colonel Grant, and commanded him, and I quote, to ensure that the taps in Delhi are flowing again before the rooster crows tomorrow. Colonel Grant took the order obediently, and early next morning called Mrs. Thimayya to report that the taps were flowing again, with a request to inform the General when he wakes that the rooster had not yet crowed. While this may seem anecdotal, it also speaks of the ability of the General to ensure good governance, something that the Forge does without any fanfare. I wonder what the General would have thought of his old city, Bangalore, which seems to be moving from being a garden city to a garbage city. But ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed privileged to be able to hold these lectures at the General's old school, Bishop Cotton, which is an impossibility without the tremendous support and empathy that we get from the Principal Professor John Zachariah. Sir, while thanking you for your support, may I please request you, sir, to make your introductory remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor indeed to make a few introductory remarks, and I must thank the trustees, Mr. Aditya Sondhi, Mr. C.N. Kumar, Mr. Kiran Lakhani, Mr. Jairaj Daniel, and Mr. Raji Purnaya for this opportunity. All of them deserve lavish praise for unfailingly bringing to Cottons, year after year, this superb intellectual feast. And I must add that the success of the significant lecture series has a lot to do with the inspiring patronage provided by Lieutenant General S.K. Jaitley, who is present here this morning along with his wife. Good morning and welcome. Air Marshal M.S.D. Walden and Admiral V.L.S. Shekhawat. The most encouraging sign of hope for the future of quality education is visible right here in this auditorium. Old Cottonians, you bring to us the riches of experience, wisdom, and innovation. Present along with you are energetic and intellectually curious youngsters from the ISC section of Cottons, all of them, as a matter of fact, seated right behind you. And they, of course, constitute the current student fraternity. This lecture is an excellent way of passing on the best of the past and the present to those who inevitably shape the future. On this landmark occasion, we pay homage to that great Cottonian, General K.S. Thimayya, Padma Bhushan, Chief of Army Staff, 1957 to 61, whose exemplary life we seek to commemorate. And I'm delighted to acknowledge the presence of his daughter, Mrs. Raj Chengappa, and her husband, Major General K.M. Chengappa, as we present this lecture in remembrance of the general who went to great lengths during peacetime to strive for a world without war. It is in the fitness of things that this year's distinguished Thimayya Memorial Lecturer is none other than Mr. Raj Chengappa, an old Cottonian who, in what has been a truly distinguished and highly rated career in journalism, has informed an entire generation of readers about the implications of nuclear weapons and about the need to work energetically for peace in a world that has far too many weapons of mass destruction for anyone's comfort. Mr. Chengappa is currently the editor-in-chief of the Tribune Group of Newspapers. The Tribune, North India's #1 newspaper, has earned a solid reputation for its fearless reporting and for its highly nuanced analysis of current affairs. In a brilliant, award-winning career that has spanned nearly 3 decades, Mr. Chengappa rose from the ranks to become one of the nation's most valued journalists. Those of us who have been readers of India Today can never forget his highly illuminating reports from Bangalore in the years when he was the magazine's Bangalore correspondent. He anchored nearly 150 cover features that sealed his reputation as one of India's most incisive news analysts and commentators. He has covered a truly impressive range of subjects, including international affairs, politics, defense, business, science, technology, environment, health, and entertainment. He was the founder editor of the Indian edition of Scientific American and of the India Today Group's highly rated periodical on career choices called India Today Aspire. He has also won numerous prestigious awards in both the national and international arenas, and fellowships from universities such as Harvard and Oxford. He is the author of the book Weapons of Peace, the secret story of India's quest to be a nuclear power, regarded by many as the best book on the subject of India's nuclear program. As a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change, I'm sure he will have a lot to contribute. And after his dinner with Nobel laureate Sukhai the day before, there must be a good story in the pipeline. This morning, we are truly fortunate to have the opportunity to benefit from Mr. Chengappa's immense experience of world affairs. He will be speaking to us on a topic of great significance to our times. His lecture, I'm sure, will provide us with some key insights into the paradox that is embodied in the adoption of a nuclear weapons program by India, the land of the Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi, the nation that has historically stood for the principles of non-violence and peace. We really need to understand the exigencies and compulsions that lie behind such a paradox. After all, who in their right mind will want an all-out nuclear war? In this context, I would like to draw your attention to a highly perceptive remark made by the American General Omar Bradley, who, along with his compatriot General George S. Patton and Marshal Zhukov of the USSR, made the final push that ended the evil reign of Hitler and his Nazi regime in May 1945. A few months later, when the atom bombs were dropped over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a badly shaken General Bradley said, and I quote, "Ours is a world of nuclear giants and ethical infants. We know more about war than we know about peace, more about killing than we know about living. We have grasped the mystery of the atom and rejected the Sermon on the Mount," unquote. The fact that a remark such as that is still applicable in our world today is a sad reminder that the lessons of history are often sadly ignored by the powers that be. I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished speaker, Mr. Chengappa, will help us gain some clarity with regard to several troubling questions. Sir, we are honored that you are here with us this morning at Cotton's with your gracious wife, Mrs. Chengappa, and hope that your experience at Cotton's will be extremely warm and cordial. Let me conclude with the words of C.S. Lewis. The next best thing to being oneself is to sit around people who are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Zachariah, for beautifully setting the tone for today's lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, as part of our homage to the late General, last year we instituted the General Thimayya Medal to recognize exemplary service to public life by one or more old Cottonians. Our medal winners last year were two senior naval officers, Rear Admiral Sanjay Vadgaonkar, NM, and Rear Admiral Prem Nair. We are delighted to announce our medal winners for 2012. Please take a look. We find that our medal winners have a lot in common. Both are distinguished officers from the Indian Foreign Service. Both belong to distinguished families. Both follow tennis. Both were avid debaters. Both have retired to Bangalore and are, of course, both old Cottonians. We do realize that Ambassador Sinai and Ambassador Khalili were only briefly in Cottons, but we see their acceptance of the medal as an acknowledgement of their being part of our alumni family, and on our part, we are honored to be able to recognize their exemplary careers. Mr. Peter Lynn Sinai has served as Secretary East, Ministry of External Affairs, India's ambassador to Iraq and Austria, as also the permanent representative to the United Nations, which should inspire the young Cottonians here, considering how closely all of you engage with the model UN. Besides English and Hindi, Mr. Sinai is fully conversant in Arabic and German. He holds a BA in Mathematics from Elphinstone College, Mumbai, and a Master's in Economics from St. Stephen's. He later got an MA in Jurisprudence from Christ Church, Oxford, where he went as a Rhodes Scholar. Mr. Sinai is fond of jazz, of Sorpotel, and of reading. And his favorite books include The Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism by George Bernard Shaw. And an intelligent and gracious woman, Mrs. Rowena Sinai, is with us today, for which we're very grateful. May I please request our patron, Lieutenant General S.K. Jaitley, to present Mr. Peter Sinai the General Thimayya Medal for 2012.
Respected Principal Zachariah, members of the respected trustees, fellow Cottonians, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor for me to receive this medal, which was both unexpected and undeserved. But the fact is, I was, as pointed out, for a very brief time in Bishop Cotton's. I was here in the third standard in 1942 for a few months. And that's all. I was 9 years old. I was put in Pope House, the colors being below yellow and white, the colors of the Catholic pontiff and the flag of the Vatican, which demonstrated, I now realize, demonstrates the ecumenical spirit of Bishop Cotton's and the sense of tolerance which it has imbibed, it has imbued generations of Cottonians. Tolerance which is so vital for nation building in our own country, and also is the response, real response and remedy to the menace of terrorism worldwide. This is something which Bishop Cotton's can really take pride in, contributing to the country and to the world. But I would also say that I had, in the short period I was in the school, I succeeded in getting caned by the then principal, Canon Elfrick. I dare say a number of other old-timers have shared my experience. I believe my dear friend Akbar Khalili is one of them. And but that started me off on an academic career which served me well. I topped the list in the Bombay University with mathematics, became Rhodes Scholar for India in 1957. In fact, I prepared for that while I was in Oxford. And I took the examination in Delhi, in London, in Delhi for interviews only, including an interview with Prime Minister Nehru at that time, who was then our foreign minister. But nowadays, or rather in the 50s, the UPSC provided the best opportunity for careers for youngsters. And nowadays, things are different. There is, young boys and girls have options, many options before them. to choose something worthwhile. They can follow their own bent, their own interests. And the country needs competence in every possible field. The Foreign Service certainly gave us many opportunities, both for public service and for meeting interesting people in India and abroad. I had the privilege, while serving in Moscow as in charge of the mission there, of calling on Dr. Peter Kapitsa, known as the father of the Soviet atomic bomb. And in view of the subject of today's lecture, I want to mention this episode where when I met him, I consulted him as to what he thought was the future of nuclear energy and how to dispose of nuclear waste. His reply was quite surprising to me at that time, and it's worth repeating. He said that nuclear plants should be set up not in countries but offshore, out at distance from population centers. And as for the nuclear waste, it should be sealed in rockets and launched towards the sun. Perhaps it might be an expensive approach, but had it been followed, the tragedy that that Japan faced recently might not have occurred. And our present crisis over Kundakulam nuclear plant, which is also a Soviet-aided plant incidentally, might have been avoided. But it is another person I had the privilege to meet as a young officer in 1961 was General Thimayya himself when he was Army Chief. And it impressed me greatly to meet him, especially as I had also joined the academy earlier as a cadet. And my father had called me out and sent me to college instead. But so I never got commissioned. However, meeting General Thimayya personally certainly has made me would treasure this medal in a way that makes it quite special for me. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sinai. We're truly inspired by your presence, sir. Mr. Akbar Mirza Khalili has served as Officer on Special Duty, Ministry of External Affairs, as India's ambassador to Iran and to Italy, as well as our High Commissioner to Australia. He speaks and understands as many as 9 languages and is fluent in Persian and Urdu, apart from English and Hindi. Mr. Khalili has done his BA Honours in Economics from Loyola Chennai and also holds a law degree. He was a benchmate, classmate, and tennis court mate of the legendary Ramanathan Krishnan during his Madras University days. Interested in literature, poetry, and comparative theology, Mr. Khalili has been a supporter of these lectures, and in fact, one of the photographs that you saw of his was at the first lecture in 2005. His brother Afsar is also an old Cottonian, as are his 4 daughters. May I again request General Jaitley to please present Mr. Akbar Khalili the General Thimayya Medal for 2012.
Professor Zakaria, General Jaitley, Aditya Sondi, trustees. My education started in cotton. I was totally uneducated till the age of 9. One of the fortunate people who was not influenced by anything. For some reason or the other, which I won't explain, I never could stay in school for a few weeks or months. The first prolonged period of incarceration and education started here. And perhaps because of that, my memories are very sharp. 1944, 1 year I studied. Broadly, it was a white and fair Anglo-Indian school. The war was on. There were a few browns and few yellows also, who were refugees from Singapore, which had been conquered by the Japanese. It was a very interesting mix. But above all, you had a sense of fair play, especially if you won a fight. Normally you had a fight within about 2 weeks' time when you landed. Somebody would pick on you and say, meeting at the bogs at 4 p.m. We didn't know the language. And most of us Indians never knew boxing because to be hit on the face is a great shame for us. But once you boxed and had it, then you were a pal. And you had a great sense of camaraderie and friendship. That in turn would lead to all types of escapades, as a result of which Canon Elphick had to come into the picture and gave me 2 sets of caning. And I was reprieved because it was to be given in installments actually. But they spared me. I remember being usually towards the end of my class in everything, and not distinguished in sports also. But the memories of the school are very deep and very affectionate, despite the cuts I got at the back, despite the poor performance in everything I didn't attempt or attempted. And it has led me to ponder, what is the school ultimately? Perhaps one of the greatest failures of free India is the neglect of primary and secondary education for our common people. The missionary schools could only fulfill a small part. It's a great failure of our governments and our public that the so-called municipal and corporation schools cannot guarantee that the persons who come out of the schools are almost as good as those who come from privileged schools. Maybe it's the political exigencies, maybe it's the caste system, where you give emphasis to the upper fellows being brilliant, our Indian mind. If you study the French Revolution, after they were crushed by the combination of outside powers, the real revolution, people like Lazare Carnot and unknown civil servants who realized this republic could never survive the intrigues of monarchies and great powers without producing a citizenship which was competent. That is why the French went far ahead of Britain and other countries in ensuring that the education for the common man, when he came out of school and had a baccalaureate, was far higher than anyone else. Republican excellence, creation of schools where the rich man and the poor man could be sure that the servant's child and his child would go to school within 3-4 kilometers and get the same education. Now whether France has ended up with Francois Hollande and God knows what other characters they produced is a separate matter, but that's the base of a republic, where the common man knows that he's not left behind. The second point which I'd like to tell you, as a result of my exposure abroad and in India, is that in big countries, and particularly in Asian countries with a history, when you have these loyalties which are absolute, it's very dangerous. Love of country, love of God. Neither country needs you nor God needs you. Your loves have to have intermediate loyalties. If you study the countries which have succeeded, like Britain, despite its powerless state and terrible characters who are their leaders today, but the fact is, what strikes you about them is that what they make fun of, the old school tie, the college. Your attachment to the country is built by attachment to a number of institutions, to your city, to your school, to your region. Your loyalties go, and there's no contradiction. But the minute you have these absolute commitments to God and country, God knows against which citizen you are going to turn tomorrow. You know what I mean? These are things that I've learned by exposure. to other countries. As far as General Thimayya is concerned, I don't say I knew him or other things, but I know as a young man when I was in Madras and he was the head of the UTC, my late uncle used to be a favorite cadet of his. And I've seen him trying to persuade him to join the Indian Army. But unfortunately, this uncle, his son, his daughter passed away very young, and he decided to become a doctor instead. I think that I've said enough about my experience here. There's a lot more I would like to add. Memories they come crowding back. During that 1 year, suddenly we'd be inspired to go and close all the outlets to Bishop Cotton's, the holes and others, because there was fear of plague. So leaves would be kept and burnt, and all the bandicoots used to be taken out from the holes, and we were told to hit them. Then Laurence Olivier made Henry V at that time. It was deemed a patriotic film. So we cotton boys had to go to Rex Cinema or somewhere, which had air conditioning which came under our bottoms. Because that was the great air conditioner. Underneath there was a big fan and there were holes underneath. And God knows whether we went for the cinema or for the air. But it was quite exciting. And then we went there and we heard of Laurence Olivier. I mean, who could care for Laurence Olivier? And we were all taken, and God Save the Queen was played. And right in front, in the front row, dressed in white, were a number of Italian prisoners of war who were marched in to learn the virtues of patriotism. So these are, I think I'll end by saying, schools like Cotton's and my old school Dufton in Madras, basically Church of England schools. I don't want to draw a distinction between Jesuits and Baptists and others, Muslim and Hindus. But there's a cultural component in this. A type of easygoing attitude to certain peccadillos was quite common in Christian college, Dufton. And in due course you matured. And you had an affection for these institutions. This didn't crush you. It is elitist without being elitist. I recall the type of students we had. Gradually, even in that 1 year, many went, left. Their parents were in the war. More and more Indians came. The affection in our own family, are you a Cottonian or Baldwin's fellow or a Joseph's, and these two fights outside, the loyalties became fiercer and fiercer as the Indians got in. You know what? But it was fun. And you were not so elitist as the new schools which are coming up, where people look at your cars, and you look at what car have you come in, what have you... I mean, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous. You need some elitism. Without some elitism, no country runs. But that elite has to be humane. It has to be in touch with others. Otherwise, you're populist demagoguery. I therefore hope, in these years of greed, corruption, which always afflicts the best institutions, education, hospitals, religion, most money is in that. Huh? So, despite all these things, you retain a reputation for this type of humanity to serve India and serve our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khalili, for that pointed lesson in loyalty, and I hope we continue to stay loyal to our institution. And for the young Cottonians here, I hope both our medal winners will inspire some of you to pursue the foreign service. You could hardly find better examples. Friends, we have put together a short video of the past lectures with a message that is self-explanatory. Please take a look.
Education is simply the soul of a society, as it passes from one generation to another. G.K. Chesterton. Words of wisdom that inspired a few Cottonians and motivated them to pass on to future generations a gift of inestimable value, the gift of knowledge. Thus was born the idea of an annual lecture series, delivered by Cottonians who had risen to great heights in their respective careers and who shared with a rapt audience the cumulative wealth of their insights and experiences over a wide range of topics.
My topic is peace, ethics, Occam's razor, and India's gift of ahimsa.
I wanted to use art in health to tell the stories.
According to a study by the Institute for Policy Studies, 51 of the largest 100 economies in the world today are corporations, not countries.
But this was no ordinary lecture series. It was dedicated to the memory of an extraordinary man, a Cottonian, whose exemplary feats on life's battleground earned him the respect and admiration of his peers in India and across the globe. General K.S. Thimayya, in memory of a man such as this, was the first General K.S. Thimayya Memorial Lecture in 2005. The first speaker, none other than Nandan Nilekani, introduced by the erstwhile principal of Bishop Cotton's, Mr. A.T. Balraj. Mr. Nilekani spoke about corporate social responsibility. Encouraged by the overwhelming success of the first General K.S. Thimayya Memorial Lecture, the trustees took it from strength to strength. Inviting a long list of distinguished speakers over the years.
And now I see in front of me a wide sea of the green and gold, from amongst whom I'm sure we are going to get the future leaders and the future generals of a nation.
Now by the Canadian Mounties and Coast Guards.
We give to the state.
And this year, the General K.S. Thimayya Memorial Lecture will feature Raj Chengappa, Editor-in-Chief, Tribune Group of Newspapers. So after 7 years of inspiring generations of Cottonians, what next? Make no small plans, for they have no power to stir the soul. Niccolo Machiavelli. Yes, the trustees have big plans for the future. Their dream, to make the General K.S. Thimayya Lecture Series an iconic event that is the epitome of knowledge dissemination and thought leadership. An event that will serve as standing testimony to the high standards of education imparted by your very own alma mater. An event that will make every Cottonian proud and every non-Cottonian doff his hat in admiration. But the trustees cannot do this alone. They need the help and generosity of more Cottonians who can contribute to making the General K.S. Thimayya Memorial Lecture scale greater heights. Donations to the trust may be made to the General K.S. Thimayya Memorial Trust. Come, let's keep the green and gold flag flying high every year. Nec dextrorsum, nec sinistrorsum.
We hope the old Cottonian community will heed our clarion call for support going forward as it has thus far. We would like to thank for this video compilation OC Rajiv Raja and his team at Brand Music for putting the video together entirely at their cost. Rajiv, as many of you may know, besides being an advertising giant, is an accomplished jazz flautist who runs the very popular Rajiv Raja Combine. Our special thanks to Mr. P.P. Bajaj for the voiceovers and OCs Preetham Koilpillai and Chris Avinash for the background music score of the school song. Friends, it's time now to focus on the lecture itself. It is a rare privilege for us to have as our keynote speaker Mr. Raj Chengappa, Editor-in-Chief of the Tribune Group of Newspapers and author of the acclaimed book, Weapons of Peace. The book, as also today's topic, explore India's quest to be a nuclear power, the behind-the-scenes maneuvers, and the close shaves, as it were, that we might have had in this pursuit. It is a most pleasant coincidence that one of the moving forces behind India's nuclear program is himself an old boy, none other than the inestimable Dr. Raja Ramana Padma Vibhushan. Incidentally, Dr. Ramana was the second patron of the Old Cottonians Association. The first patron, who else? General Thimayya. Friends, before we introduce Mr. Raj Chengappa in a little more detail, we thought it fit to remember Dr. Ramana today with a short pictorial tribute. Raja Ramana is 11-year-old with his beloved piano. In London with Vice Admiral Mihir Roy and Justice Kapoor, with Mrs. Gandhi as director of BAC, when Buddha smiled at Pokhran, taking charge as Union Minister of State for Defense, with his President and Prime Minister, at IIT Bombay, and at IIM Ahmedabad, at his old college, the Madras Christian College, with his elder daughter Neena at her preschool, and finally at the school hall as the patron of the Old Cottonians Association. Dr. Raja Ramana, we salute your memory today. We take this opportunity to thank Mrs. Ramana and Admiral Mihir Roy for the photographs. Unfortunately, Mrs. Ramana couldn't join us today because of a prior engagement, but we're delighted that their daughter Nirupa joins us. Ladies and gentlemen, Raj Chengappa's profile makes for a most impressive reading. As Professor Zachariah mentioned, he was the managing editor at India Today from 2003 to 2010 before taking charge at the Tribune. He has won 3 of the most prestigious journalism awards: the Prem Bhatia Award for Political Analysis and Reporting, the Statesman Award for Rural Reporting, and the Karnataka Media Academy's Outstanding Journalist Award. His exploits as a journalist have to be read to be believed, ranging from covering Ayatollah Khomeini's funeral to the Kargil War and the first post-apartheid South African elections to the Babri Masjid demolition. His outstanding coverage of Pokhran too was another feather in his cap, inspiring in many ways his book, which is now in its 4th edition, but I can tell you personally it's almost impossible to get a copy of it. Raj is incidentally our first speaker from Coorg, which is also fitting considering General Thimayya was a great son of the land. Raj is married to Mrs. Usha Chengappa, who is with us today. We welcome you, ma'am. And they have 2 children, Aditi and Anish. Raj is from the 1972 batch at Cotton's and was in Pettigrew House. Our third speaker in 8 years from Pettigrew, one of whom Ambassador Ranganathan is with us today, shows that the Pettigrew House has indeed gotten its wards to shoot straight and true. Raj himself is from a Fauji family, his dad and grandfather both being army officers. We also made a very inspiring discovery with thanks to Arun Swaminathan that Mrs. Usha Chengappa's father is a legend from the Indian Air Force, Wing Commander Padmanabh Gautam, who earned himself a Mahavir Chakra and Bar in the 1962 and 1965 operations respectively. School cricket team, and having played for the winning hockey team and football team in 1970, and one we suspect would know Raj fairly well. I think we have a photograph of the 2 of them together. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to invite on stage Raj's elder brother, Bobby Chengappa.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and it's a privilege for me to be here and partake in this event. First, because Raj Chengappa and myself studied in this great institution between 1963 and 1972. Our memories of this school, its teachers, games masters, who made us what we are today, remains vivid, as also our classmates, juniors and seniors, who made life interesting and exciting every day. There was never a dull moment in Cotton's. Secondly, because our grandfather and father served with distinction under General K.S. Thimayya, it is a pleasure to see my brother here speak at his memorial lecture. Raj Chengappa would have been the third generation in the armed forces as he was selected for the National Defense Academy, but shocked our parents by opting out to become a journalist and writer. The rest is history, as he went on to become editor of India's premier magazine, wrote a book with Dr. Abdul Kalam, and is now, of course, the managing editor of a major newspaper. Making our parents very proud of him. Raj is third of 4 children to my parents and was the boy with dimples who liked curd rice in a family that was predominantly meat eaters. Our mother used to refer to him as her little Brahmin boy. No surprises, therefore, that his wife Usha is a pure vegetarian, and so is Raj now. We also have our 2 sisters here, Kaveri and Kavita, because they studied in Sacred Hearts, and so we are happy that they would also be here to share with our brother this morning. We would also like to share with you that Raj's daughter, Aditi, is the heroine of a Tamil film that would be released at the end of this month, and we eagerly await that film. It's called Konjam Coffee, Konjam Kadil. My wife, Kalevani, and me are happy to be here this morning to listen to Raj, whom we have always admired for his incisive writing skills. We wish him success in the future. Thank you.
What do I say? I was moved to tears, so it's taking me a little while to come back. I had it all prepared, but I didn't realize I'd be this emotional. It's been 40 years, and to have Bobby introduce me, someone I'd looked up right through in school, modest, but with tremendous accomplishments. He was 2 years elder to me when I joined school. And it was good to have a sibling. You wouldn't get too bullied. I could always refer to Bobby and say, he's there, and I would get away. He did outstandingly well in school. He captained the school cricket team, took us to victory and glory. And I would always bask in the glow of Bobby. I was very happy to listen to 2 former Cottonians, outstanding, distinguished, and also to realize that many of their experiences of the school was just like mine. I was an ordinary student. I don't think I excelled in anything particular. But all those memories that stay with me, in some ways, began the journey for me to be here and to do what I did. And as I came in, I thought of a lot of the things. This particular building happens to be in the 3rd 11. And I remember playing cricket here. Scoring, I think, 25 runs quite proudly for our under-14 school team. There are other things as well. I remember there were guava trees across this compound wall. And we were hungry then. I was a boarder. And frequently we would sneak across the wall and pluck guavas from that tree. And we got caught once. And of course we were marched to the principal, that time Principal I.L. Thomas. And I went back today and met Professor Zakharaya, and I told him it's been many years since I've come back to this office, and I remember clearly what happened then. He warned us and let us off. But there were many good things that happened too. I remember playing in 4th 11, which is now, I think, the parking lot of the school. And the principal used to come and watch us play. And I remember batting, and after I finished, he came and said, Raj, you've got some stuff in you. Why don't you pursue this? It's very encouraging to have that kind of, a person of his stature come and talk to me. I was just 9 years old. Bobby did far better than me in cricket. I got to under 14. It was a great disappointment that we got knocked out of the semi-finals. I was wicketkeeper and opening batsman like Bobby. Maybe he inspired me so much that I took to him. I was a better spin bowler. I should have been, in retrospect, doing my off spin rather than wicket keeping. There were good moments too. I remember anchoring the relay team. I was good at relay. Individual events, I was fine, but I would never get the medal. But teamwork, yes. I remember that both for the senior relays as well as the junior relays, we came first. I finished one and I started one and did well. And I still remember Bobby hugging me. He was also on the team when I, sped ahead and gave the second person the baton and with at least 10 meters lead. So I probably was good at some things, but it was much later in life that I began to realize how valuable this experience was. There's this movie that came out recently, Kung Fu Panda, and there's this very wise old turtle called Oogway. And he said, there are no accidents. And I thought about my life here and all the energy that went through. And I said, every moment was as it should be. The triumphs, the tribulations, the successes, the humiliation sometimes when you had to learn the hard way, the friends we made, the fights we had, the little innovative things we did. I still remember that there used to be bamboo trees, I don't know if they still exist, in front of the principal's office, just to the other side near 4th Standard. And we'd go and cut twigs off them and split them with a blade, cutting our fingers many times. And then we would take these cardboard things, build delta wings, and put a tail on top of it. Put your brand new fountain pen cap onto it, put it as the nose cone, and then put a string around it and then have dog fights with the rest of the students. Parents didn't approve. A lot of pens went waste, but we had a lot of fun. And so school for me in retrospect was that. A lot of fun, a lot of good friends, a lot of things we learned very quietly. I didn't do very well in studies. I guess this must be not a good thing to call me here. It's not a very inspiring thing to tell students here. I kind of scraped through senior Cambridge. And that was because I'm so glad to see Mr. Balraj here, the former principal of the school. And he told me I had to choose between science and, I think, English and social science at that time, and I chose science because that time, as an engineer, you got better pay and better chance of getting a job. And I made this huge mistake, I think, in retrospect, that I took additional mathematics because Mr. Balraj taught additional mathematics. And I loaded myself. I truly loaded myself. And then one day he told me very nicely, he said, son, why are you in this class? You've got physics, chemistry, and biology. Don't take additional mathematics. You're not going to get through. So I said, no, I got to do this. Now that Mr. Balraj has done that, and I sat and I studied additional mathematics to the detriment of all my other subjects. The only lesson I proved was that I passed additional mathematics. I did terribly in senior Cambridge, which meant that didn't give me a great amount of scope to do other things in life. And I went to Christ College after that and did arts, kind of slumbered through college. Again, not a very inspiring model to be in. Spent a lot of time cycling to college. I think I learned a lot while cycling. By then my dad had retired, and I used to get 1 rupee as pocket money. So to save that money, I cycled 14 kilometers so that I could go and have a hole in a vada, and, oh, sorry, the other way around. And I shouldn't be saying this, but a Chamana cigarette with my college mate then. And we'd stop by at this Janta dhaba on the way and smoke the cigarette with this 1 rupee. But cycling to school gave me a lot of time. It gave me a lot of time to think. It built my physical prowess, because 32 kilometers a day was quite a lot. And I realized that you had to do a lot of things by yourself in some senses. So I was telling the principal this morning that in the final year of my college, again, not a very inspiring thing, I told the teachers that, look, I'm going to do my own studies. They were very happy to get rid of me. I used to ask these terrible questions that used to irk them. And it was a bit noisy behind. So they would sort of say, fine, we'll give you all the attendance, you do this. And so I sat at home and I, did my own studies, and I was happy to say that I did top the college. It surprised the principal, but he was gracious enough then to acknowledge it. Bangalore to me, and therefore coming back to my formal talk today, and I'd like to acknowledge many, many of them here. Firstly, of course, the principal of Bishop Cotton Boys School, Professor John Zachariah, who said so many kind words to me, and I'm awed and embarrassed to be up here because it sort of just built me up like this, and I know I'm going to disappoint you. By the way, the first time I was asked to speak was at the hall, and they tried me out for debate. I went up there, I stood, I panicked, I walked off. I've lasted this time. And Lieutenant General S.K. Jaitley, the distinguished patron of the General K.S. Thimayya Trust, Aditya Sondhi, who's been so nice to me, who's been in touch with me, he's put up with all the nonsense that I've been doing. I don't reply to his mails on time, but he's taken good care of me, as the other trustees, C.N. Kumar, Kiran Lakhani, Jaraj Daniel, and Rajiv Purnaya. I must tell them what a tremendous job they've done. I know, they deserve it. They deserve it. As OCs, we fought like hell. As soon as I passed out of school and college, and we tried to become members, but, we just didn't get our act together, and I felt my first job was actually with the City Tab, and then later on, strangely enough, I came and started working at India Today, whose office was opposite at the Cash Pharmacy. We had a little place there, so it was ironical. The very place that I used to go and buy sweets from, and we would, I'd be sitting up there looking at school again. But the OCs at that time, we had fun, we came back. I still remember this little naughty thing we used to do when we were in school. I don't know whether it still happens, St. Pete's Ball. We were all invited when we were in 9th and 10th or something. And just before, we'd pick up, those days, cotton girls and boys were separate, so the girls' school would come across to us. And we'd start dancing, and we'd time it. Just before dinner, we'd say, gotta go to the toilet, and leave the girl alone. We didn't want to buy her dinner. It was the OCs that paid. And I paid when I became an OC. And I also like to thank the family members of the late General Thimayya, who was present here. And I'm so proud to be here to talk with such, to be present here and to be invited to talk for this general that served the country so well, distinguished. I wish I was at a time when I could have researched the history. I haven't done enough, but one day I will. Of course, there are a lot of old Cottonians who are here, and I'd like to thank them as well. I feel it a privilege to be here. young Cottonians, Bobby and me. We are in that younger lot, I hope. And of course, present Cottonians, all of you all there. There's so many others here that I'd like to acknowledge. My wife, Usha, who's been with me through this great journey. My soulmate, who's helped me through thick and thin, who helped me discover myself, understand myself. To her, I thank you. My sisters, Kaveri and Kavita, who put up with me when I was young, who always encouraged me on, and I remember that. My mother, who couldn't be here, but who sacrificed so much for us to all grow up. I thank her. My father, who I remember very fondly as the kindest man I knew. I pay my respects to him. To other members of my family and relatives, my many friends who are here, my well-wishers, those who have written about, those who haven't. I noticed my Guru Bharat Thakur also here and his wife Bhumika Chala. I welcome them. So many others that I can't acknowledge by name, I welcome you all and I thank you. It's such a privilege to be here. And of course, all the others that I would like to meet after this, I thank you and I hope that this talk that I'm just about to begin would add some light, throw some light to what is there. May I just have the lights dimmed a bit, please? This is a subject that is close to my heart. I did a lot of environment reporting in the 80s, in the 90s it was the bomb, and 2000 the bomb as well. That's because it became a subject that started from Bangalore actually, and I owe this city a lot. This was the science capital of India. And a lot of the people I met inspired me. Science was something that, I was terrible in science in school, I must say that. I kind of just passed physics and chemistry and others. But when I got down to speaking to people who, incidentally, including Dr. Raja Ramana, who spent hours with me, hours and hours with me for this book that I wrote, I understood that the greatness of what they lay is to make complex subjects simple and put it across to people like me who didn't understand it. And so here from this particular city which had so many great scientists, that I learned on the job to understand and appreciate science, the awesome nature of science. Science is just not destruction as we have seen in the bomb, but tremendous technological achievement. It is at the cutting edge. It makes your brain think a lot. Raja Ramana, who spent so many hours with me, I remember, of course, he first got upset with me because I reviewed his book, and I said that he's better off playing the piano than writing. He didn't talk to me for a year, but I think because I was a Cottonian, he forgave me. And then he spent a lot of hours explaining to me the physics of the bomb. And so this lecture, in some respects, is a tribute to him. Subsequently, he invited us to his house, my wife, me, and my children, and he played the piano for us. I see my brother-in-law, Nandan, was here, and he listened to my brother-in-law play as well. He was a legend, and this lecture is a tribute to what he did. I thought, since the title of this was Myth and Reality, let's get to some reality first. I thought we'd show something that's true and live that's happening. Let me see if this works. I wish it does.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Pick the target, target 1556, altitude 2 kilometers.
You can still see it moving.
Tracking status normal.
DHO, please rouse the flight tenders to launch there. DHO, please note. Rouse the flight tenders.
Sir, noted.
That's Agni 5. That was launched April 19th, sorry, this year. I was present there. I proudly present this picture. That's with the two top scientists. The one on my immediate right is Avinash Chanda, and the other is Saraswat, Dr. Saraswat, who's the DRDO chief. The black tip that you see, and I do the pointer, that, yeah, that's where India's nuclear weapons sit. You can fit a hydrogen bomb in it, you can fit an atom bomb, you can fit several bombs in that. That test, ladies and gentlemen, was one that brought India's missile prowess to fruition in many ways, to maturity. What you saw was just 50 seconds of a liftoff, which, by the way, is the wonder of science. You stand there, you're a little boy again with those Diwali rockets, let me tell you that. The sound that you hear is equal to 10 Boeing jets if you stood next to them and all of them put their engines. It's so deep. There couldn't be a better rock band, let me tell you, with that kind of a sound that comes. It comes like this, woo, you know. The light, you saw the tail of fire that went. It's a sound and light show. You know, a tail that's almost a kilometer long. Brilliant orange, brilliant orange. It's a sight that is so, I mean, it's just 10 seconds, but it makes you stop and watch. It's a privilege. It was a privilege to be there. It took 20 minutes to go and splash down close to Australia, next to Indonesia, 5,000 kilometers away. If you took an ordinary passenger aircraft in that, it would take you 5 hours to reach. The sound that you hear is the death rattle. If you ever get, and if it ever strikes down at a point where you live, you would not know, to use a school phrase, what hit you. When an atom bomb explodes, and I want a script. There's this movie, The Quick and the Dead. You're dead. There's no chance. Nothing stays with you. The temperatures that you hit is almost tens of millions of degrees that you see. When you stare at an atom bomb, and if you ever do, you're blinded instantly at great distance because you're staring at the sun. That is the temperatures that is there. Once that explodes, the heat wave that strikes will eviscerate anything in its way. There are only ashes left where you were. Then comes the gale force of winds. 300 kilometers, we thought Katrina or the latest one that struck the USA or one that struck us was big. You've seen nothing. It will smash any concrete thing on its front. It just flattens it. Nothing to be seen. For miles. And then, if you aren't dead then, and you will survive that, you have an intense nuclear radiation that comes out that will contaminate the place for kilometers around. And in no time, the people that are close who would receive this very high dose of radiation will die of various forms of cancer and sickness. This is the most destructive weapon that humankind has ever built. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to treat it with respect and fear. I'll show you something just to give you an idea of what that does. I've got a film, but it's a very old film because this was the 4th shot nuclear test that was done. Oh, volume. I'll just restart it. There's no fun otherwise. This is the problem with the volume. I think I need some volume, otherwise there's no. Volume? Not coming? Sorry about this. Technology. You win some, lose some. We're out. Okay, we can do without it. What's that? My computer volume? What will
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. These pictures of the ascending water column show the expanding cloud of spray at the base of the column moving outward and enveloping the ships in the target array. Great quantities of radioactive water from the column descended upon the decks of the nearby vessels, and ship hulls a mile away were drenched by the wall of foaming water. Photographic tower on Bikini shows the column composed of millions of tons of water rising at an initial rate exceeding the speed of sound. The water and spray from the explosion will fall for several minutes. Here again is an excellent photographic portrayal of the boiling, foaming wall of water engulfing the ships in the foreground. This highly lethal spray was intensely radioactive.
Okay, just to give you an idea of, but it did happen in real life. It was not a theoretical postulation. This test was the fourth test done by America and was done underwater. So the column of water that you saw rose and then the famous mushroom cloud, you couldn't see the light, but if you saw that, I've got a later thing of this. This column of smoke that I'm showing you now will give you an idea of what happens when you actually drop this on a population center, as it happened in 1945, August 6th, in Hiroshima. This cloud of smoke that you're seeing is what Enola Gray saw, the aircraft that dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima. This is what it did. Everything was, the last structure I went and saw, ironically, strangely and coincidentally, I went and saw Hiroshima in 2000. This building still exists that you see here. They made a monument of it. Everything else was flattened. They then 3 days later dropped a bomb on Nagasaki. Again, you can see the characteristic mushroom cloud, all black and white pictures. This is what happened to Nagasaki. This is the entire city flattened. You don't tamper with this weapon. This particular mark here, you see, was a man standing, sitting actually. Nothing can be seen of him, just the mark, a bit of his backside. He was left eviscerated, to ashes instantly. This was a little cycle that they found many years later. It belonged to a little boy called Shinichi, who loved his tricycle. When the bomb was dropped, he was playing with his best friend Kimiko. They died instantly. They were buried in the garden of Shinichi's house together. 40 years later, their parents decided to move them to a proper grave. This is what happens if you are at a great distance from it. The heat of the bomb will just make your skin peel off. People who have stood there, the entire thing just, their flesh was hanging. It's an awful sign. This is what Michiko Yamako, a bomb victim, said. When I saw a very strong light, a flash, I put my arms over my face unconsciously. Almost instantly, I felt my face was inflating. I thought I was directly hit by the bomb and was dying. Shortly after, I felt my body flying in the air, and then I lost consciousness. When I was rescued, my hair was burned. My face was inflated like a balloon. Though my mother did not see, I knew it. I wondered why my shirt had been burnt and hanging around my arms. I soon realized they were pieces of my skin. It was hell. I saw people looking for water, and they died soon after they drank it. I saw many people go to the river in search of water, and who also died. The whole city was destroyed and burning. There was no place to go. Strange. Almost 4,000 years ago, when the Mahabharata was conceived, they talked of the Brahmastra. And the description given is amazing. It says, it was a single projectile, charged with all the power of the universe, an incandescent column of smoke and flame, as bright as 10,000 suns, rose in all its splendor. It is an unknown weapon, an iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death, endowed with the force of thousand-eyed Indra's thunder. It was destructive of all living creatures. We don't know how they got this passage, but if you look at what happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this was probably an apt description of what happened. Why? Why should we be interested in this? Why should we give a damn, as young students would say? Why should we know about the bomb? I mean, it's distant, it happened 65 years ago. Who cares? I mean, we do it. Nothing's happened to us all these years. We fought wars. Why bother? If you look, and I think it requires a bit of understanding, I thought I'll give you all, since there are a lot of students here, a brief history of conflict, so brief that it'll be over in a flash. Just as we little boys fought in the chapel and settled our scores, conflict has been an integral part of our lives. There is in nature a great balance, good versus evil, constantly. A cosmic dance that keeps us all engaged. The bad fascinates us. The villains in Hindi movies do. They become as big heroes as the heroes themselves. And so why do we fight? What is the search that we look for inner peace, as we call it? And yet, in every day, we are in conflict with each other. And if we are in conflict with each other, that then moves, as my distinguished ambassador said, moves from school to the region, to the state, to the nation, to the world. If we as individuals are unsettled, conflict then will not just be with us, but with the world. And that is the search we all have in trying to understand how we can bring this. Do we need to? Is the world in a brilliant balance? Is this the way the divine thought of us and kept us so that we went higher and higher, even as we built even more destructive weapons. And that is a thought, if you look, why do we fight? We fought in school for food. They fought in caves for food, territory. That was the first sign of a battle. So we used stones at that time. There were other things we fought for love. Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships and killed many. For territory, Alexander the Great, who then had to die, of course, close to India. But he conquered the world as we knew it then. For ambition, Napoleon Bonaparte. We do all have that. Some express it in extreme ways. For ideology, who can forget the communist revolution and Marxism? And there is a part that I thought I should read of how Marx, in many senses, described conflict. In his Communist Manifesto, Marx said, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. In a word, oppressor and oppressed. They stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on uninterrupted. Now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended, either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large, or in the common ruin of the contending classes." Then there was Hitler, that we're seeing here, who took racial supremacy to the extremes, precipitated World War II and the destruction and the development of the bomb. More recently, religion has always been, as my earlier speaker said, something of great conflict. More people have been killed in God's name than for other reasons. And more recently, in your generation, the young generation has seen how 9/11, again a diabolical attack on the Twin Towers in New York, and how the world changed that day. So we've been in conflict all the time. And if you look, the atom bomb is not an event in isolation that happened because there was a tremendous technological advancement and we just wanted to build a bomb. No. Everything had to do with settling conflict. You have to understand that. There's a context. The atom bomb is the other end of the curve of this whole thing. We first started, if you look at the weapons of war, with bows and arrows, maybe with stones first, with the famous slingshot that you just flung across and killed it. Why did you do that? Because you wanted to avoid physical harm to yourself, and you wanted food. The further you got away from your enemy, the better chance you had of your own survival. So we invented things that you could throw at a distance. Your bows and arrows that you could shoot so that you didn't have to be in direct confrontation with the animal that was there, the tiger at that particular point. Subsequently, you fought for territory and used these same things. And as we got to the Iron and Bronze Age, we used metal, swords, things. We did tremendous harm. And if you notice, everything of this has got to do with bodily harm. And what has that got to do? It's got to do with death and the fear of death. Nothing threatens us more as people than death. It is a reality that we've never come to terms with it. We are always it is something we're all frightened of. We think it shouldn't happen to any of us, shouldn't happen to our siblings, shouldn't happen to our children. Death is what weapons are all about, and the threat that they form. And so, as we built our weapons, we got more and more dangerous. We wanted to not just kill one person, we'd like to kill the army. We'd like to kill troops, a platoon, whatever numbers that were there. So we built even more horrendous weapons. With it came mobility, horsemanship. You couldn't walk the infantry, so you'd build the cavalry. So you'd had horses that could gallop, and camels and elephants, and any animal that had speed that you could bring in to cause destruction. And as the ascent went, you built these giant replications of slingshots. So you put stones and you'd work technology that can throw huge boulders across, subsequently fireballs. And that, of course, came with the invention of gunpowder. China contributed to that. And that changed the nature of war, of our ability to cause death for our own ends. And as missiles grew, the initial rockets that we now play around with in Diwali became fire bombs that they would chuck across great distances and pulverize the enemy even before they came there. And they got better and better, and we got better and better, and we thought this was progress. And so we had the muskets and gunpowder and everything else that went, so you could fire at a great distance. 100 meters, 200 meters, we built bigger and bigger. And then, of course, ships that took us across oceans and continents. We built cannons, and that's when conquest began in terms of the giant countries, whether it was Europe, Britain, all these colonial powers. They were great seabound nations that were there. And if you looked at the weapons of World War I, you'd have the cannons, you'd have the early tanks that came in. All this was to cause greater and greater destruction while not inflicting pain on yourself. So that was the progress of this thing. Finally, the aircraft and B-24 Liberator bombers symbolized a lot of that. They could rain death on you through these giant bombs that came. And so the atom bomb didn't come in isolation. The atom bomb was just the perfection of the greatest killing machine that human beings invented. And in doing so, it was the greatest of science. That is the biggest of all these things. It was what all yogis would like to do, the conquest of space, time, and energy. The dream was, instead of carrying these giant things across and then being open to target, is there some way we could rain the same amount of death with something as powerful and as tiny as an atom? And the conquest of that and the understanding of the atom very quickly, to go through it, radioactivity discovered in 1896. I'm terrible at physics, so you'll have to correct me on this. Marie Curie discovers the various elements that cause it. Rutherford builds the atomic model. Niels Bohr then explains and perfects the model. But there's one man who was fleeing Nazi Germany, Leo Szilard, unsung hero, who as he crosses the street gets this phenomenal vision that nuclear energy, the energy that is found in the nucleus, if you are able to release it in some way by forming a chain reaction because of the instability that uranium or radioactive elements have, could then combine to give you a tremendous burst of energy that could be harnessed for power, as we do with our generation, or destroy, and huge explosions. And when they realized that Germany was building the bomb, the race began. So Szilard, Einstein, they all went to the US president at that point, and the Manhattan Project was formed, and Robert Oppenheimer, and I'm skipping history because there's very little time. I'd love to have spent a lot more. But quickly, this was the first bomb. And when I ask students across this particular word, Trinity, they usually come up with this. The Matrix, the famous Trinity kick, the movie that changed a lot of our thinking in terms of technology and how they brought in. But this is the real Trinity, the day that changed the world. It was the first time an atom bomb was exploded as a test by the Manhattan Project scientists in the deserts of New Mexico. And strangely, Oppenheimer, when he saw the blast, quoted the Bhagavad Gita and said, "I shine like 1,000 suns. I am death. I am the destroyer of all the worlds." I think I have a film, I hope this works, but this is what Oppenheimer saw. No sound, I'm sorry. You can see the 1,000 suns.
Aircraft is 50 miles. The frame size of the picture is 14 by 18 miles. The film is running at normal speed.
That's what he saw. This is when they dropped, immediately after that, they dropped 2 bombs. This is the bomb that fell on Nagasaki. This is the bomb that fell on Hiroshima. And that begins this Indian story at that particular time. This is the copy of my book. I'm not propagating this. As Aditya said, it's out of print. But that's where our story begins. And there was, ironically, a great clash of ideologies that happened at that time. Not a clash of civilizations, as Samuel would say, but of ideologies. Two great ideas, two great thoughts came. The one, as the principal had said earlier, was of non-violence, of ahimsa. And the man that propounded was the father of our nation. Isn't it the greatest of irony, is that as humankind, and here was a man that came, worked a way that could topple the mightiest nation, we were also building total violence. I mean, this must be the gods that must have thought of this. That you have someone who's so powerful mentally, who could change and drive the entire nation and could throw out people, an entire empire, without firing a shot as it would be. And yet, at the same time, you had the most destructive weapon. Gandhi was convinced that his ahimsa was far ahead of the bomb, that it would prevail, and I believe that it would. And he said, the twins, truth and nonviolence, constitute the mightiest force in the world. Before it, the atom bomb is of no effect. The two opposing forces are wholly different in kind, the one moral and spiritual, the other physical and material. The one is infinitely superior to the other, which by its very nature has an end. The forces of the spirit is ever progressive and endless. Its full expression makes it unconquerable in the world. Nehru, a compatriot at that time, one of our great leaders, said Gandhi was an odd kind of pacifist, for he was an activist full of dynamic energy. So don't make no mistake, nonviolence didn't mean just I turn my face and do this. There was no submission in him to fate or anything he considered evil. He was full of resistance, though his was peaceful and courteous. Albert Einstein, who contributed to making the bomb, said, in our time of utter moral decadence, he was the only true statesman to stand for a higher human relationship in the political sphere. Generations to come will scarcely believe that such a one as this, ever in flesh and blood, walked the earth. Martin Luther King, Jr., who of course today we have as representative, I have a dream, and Obama fulfilled his dream, said, man thought twice in our century, once with Einstein and then with Gandhi. Einstein's thought transformed understanding of the physical world. Gandhi's thought transformed understanding of the political world. Soon after independence, as we all know, Gandhiji was assassinated and Prime Minister Nehru took over. And there were three dominant visions that prevailed at that time, three dominant ideologies. One was Gandhiji's grassroots idea of India, a vision that he said that the power lay in villages, in panchayats, in local self-governance. And if we had to build, we had to go small scale. Then there was the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak, which was the Hindu hardline theory, which said that the entire problems of India existed because of subjugation by Western colonial powers who killed the dharma of India. And if India had to rediscover its glory, we had to go back to that dharmic past where we would relive and rebuild India in the way we thought it should be. It didn't prevail too much at that time, though it's now gained a certain traction, as we can see much later. And of course, Nehru's modernism. And Nehru's modernism prevailed. Nehru believed that science was important. That if we had to build a nation, it had to be through harnessing technology. That the temples of this nation were not idols, but our dams and an industry and our bridges and everything else. And giant public sectors and government would take charge and build them so that we would develop. And it was Nehru's vision that prevailed for almost 30 to 40 years till it ran aground. And 1990, the reforms process began to change and end the license Raj, which had, but when it was enumerated in the first count, it was a brilliant vision that prevailed. He reflected the great Indian duality. Everything that we do in India is kind of schizophrenic in some ways, a split personality. Our whole being, our whole religion and everything else says asceticism, the negation of life in many senses. And if you do that, the illusion breaks, the maya breaks, and therefore you will attain nirvana. You will understand things as they truly are. And yet, there is also the karma yogi, who enjoys the fullness of life, who performs his duty as it is. And Nehru embodied both. And India still continues with that duality that we exist. And why is it relevant here? Because everyone thought that Nehru was against the bomb. He was. He opposed it. He never wanted this weapon. It came at his time. He did his level best to stop nuclear weapons across the world, including banning it. But when it came to India, that is the reality. The myth was he was against the bomb. The reality was that he helped build it. And he wrote to his defense minister soon after we became independent, the future belongs to those who produce atomic energy. That is going to be the chief national power of the future. Of course, defense is intimately concerned with this. Even the political consequences are worthwhile. He knew that while we required this powerful thing to provide atomic energy for us, to drive our industry, at any time we could build the most destructive weapon, as you said, if we had to defend ourselves. So Nehru actually promoted the bomb, and to do that he got the Trombay Maharaja, Homi Bhabha, who books can be written about his brilliance, his thought. A little passage of him, they got along famously. Bhabha and Nehru, they were a combination. Bhabha enjoyed the good things of life. He worked for 4 hours, and he then painted, and he, put up, he loved art and architecture. Both Bhabha and Nehru had a remarkable sense for all that was beautiful. Homi found joy in music, painting, flowers, gardens, and architecture. Nehru, with a rose in his buttonhole, with his love for the mountains, for poetry, each was deeply committed to India and its future. Both had strong faith in the power of science and technology as an instrument for economic and social change. The relationship of these two is what set the foundations for India's nuclear program. Bhabha had, this is the complex that you see that I'm showing you. This is Bhabha Atomic Research Center in Trombay. He had this amazing sense of architecture, as I mentioned, and he ensured that this is the longest laboratory that you can see. Everything was beautifully aligned. He would even put up signs in the toilet to say, keep this toilet clean, folks. He made sure everything, the tunnels, the funnels, for instance, all had to be together, the buildings had to be, and he was brilliant. And he fought with his father, who wanted him to be an engineer. So I thought this little passage which he says, his father forced him to go to Cambridge to become an engineer. He wanted to do other things. So he told his father in a letter, I seriously say to you that the business or a job as an engineer is not a thing for me. It is totally foreign to my nature and radically opposed to my temperament and opinions. Physics is my line. I know I shall do great things here, for each man can do best and excel in only the things of which he is passionately fond of, in which he believes, as I do, that he has the ability to do it. It was clear that he was setting the path, and we had these 2 great reactors that produced the plutonium that would help us get it. But we had no permission because we had an avowed power that was against nuclear weapons. Nehru promoted the building of the capability to put it together at any point. But there's this little big man, Lal Bahadur Shastri, who was our second prime minister, who actually gave the clearance in 1965. Though, a year before that, he said, our scientists are under firm orders not to make a single experiment, not to perfect a single device which is not needed for peaceful purposes. But when China exploded its nuclear weapon in 1964, he gave the order. This was Chinese test. He said, permission is being granted to begin theoretical work on explosions for peaceful purposes. No experimental work is to be done without my clearance. Shastri was a Gandhian, but he saw the practicality of the fact that now we had lost a war against China in 1962, defeated badly. We've just relived 50 years of that experience. Not a nice feeling. At that time, even more, we realized we had to protect ourselves against it. Shastri dies, ironically. Again, in a year's time, Baba dies too. The program flounders. Mrs. Gandhi comes. Initially, she's called the Gungi Gudiya, which is the kind of, anybody could manipulate her. She was the doll. She was foisted by the Congress satraps who believed that they could control her. How mistaken they were. The daughter of Nehru would soon assert herself. Sarabhai came, and he said, he was a Gandhian to heart. He said, no bomb. He told the boys, pack up, this is it. There's going to be no test. But there was one man who would change. Of course, Morarji Desai at that time, who became a future Prime Minister, said Sarabhai was a sensible boy. That madman Baba wanted to blow up the world. And Mrs. Gandhi at that time still said, I myself fail to understand how production of 1 or 2 bombs will help us. As I said earlier, Sarabhai told them, forget it, boys, we're not doing it. But, strangely, this is the time that if 1968 was when one of the most important treaties came to being, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which divided the world into nuclear haves who could keep their weapons and nuclear have-nots, who will not be allowed to build nuclear weapons, but they will be assisted in putting up nuclear power plants with the express agreement that they would never divert and would be under complete inspection and monitoring of an International Atomic Energy Agency to develop power. This was the compact which India didn't agree. If we had exploded, as Baba would have claimed, that when we started making it and we had the permission to do so, he claimed that we could do it in 18 months. We would have been a nuclear have, we wouldn't have been a nuclear pariah. We wouldn't have to go through all the problems that happened in the past. The truth, as I discovered when I was researching, was the most simple of them and the best kept secret. We didn't have enough plutonium to make the bomb. Plain and simple. I asked myself this question, why didn't we do it? We were all ready. In '64, we got the clearance. Why didn't we just go ahead and do it? And Baba, in fact, inaugurated the plutonium reprocessing plant. He painted it red as a symbol to tell the world that we are ready. The plutonium plant ran aground. It failed. We didn't have enough material. And therefore, the 1974 test. But before that, it was Mrs. Gandhi that had to do what she had to do. And there was one gentleman called P.N. Huxley who changed her mind about nuclear weapons. I met him, and I told him, Raja Ramana said you were against weapons. He exploded at me, and he was upset, and he shouted at me. He was blind by then, was dying of cancer. He just didn't want to talk to me. And then he cooled down, and he told me what he really told Mrs. Gandhi. He said, no, I wasn't against the bomb. I was against doing the test in 1974. And he said that in 1967, when he took over, he told Mrs. Gandhi, quoting historian Lawrence Namier, the weight of an argument greatly depends on him who uses it. That of the strong has force and carries conviction. That of the weak, if unanswerable, is called a quibble and apt to cause annoyance. He said that unless you have a strong army with a nuclear force, you are apt to be dismissed in world politics, all your problems as a quibble. It was he who changed her mind. And in 1972, when sanctioned, and I'm speeding through history because I wouldn't want to take more of your time, Mrs. Gandhi gave the clearance for a test, and she was shown the size of it. What did an atom bomb look? And that's the size. Little larger than a golf ball. But the explosive power of TNT equivalent to the entire fields that we have here. Can you imagine that? If you stacked all TNT across and put it and exploded it across your first 11 and second 11, stacked the entire lot and even brought it to third 11 and put it across the school, the explosive force of that will not equivalent to the explosive force of this tiny little guy who can do more damage. And so she was struck, like all of us, how does it happen? And that happens because of this tremendous physics that Ramana explained to me, which is what we did in 1974, which is this thing, which causes this chain reaction. Okay? So that's the brilliance of the bomb. It is, and if you come to the hydrogen bomb, you not only have to create an atom bomb explosion that gives you the power of the sun, a millions, 10 million degrees centigrade, that heat and that energy is what causes hydrogen to fuse, and you get the hydrogen bomb, which gives you explosives of 20 times more than what? To give you a description, if you dropped a bomb in Bangalore today, an atom bomb, you would destroy Brigade Road, this entire periphery around for about 10 kilometers. When they dropped it off Hiroshima, 150,000 people died. You drop a hydrogen bomb, most of Bangalore is gone. That's the difference in science, okay? And that's why everybody moved towards that. At the greatest moment of his triumph, those who saw it, one of the scientists got lyrical and he said, oh, it's like that mythical story of Krishna lifting the hill. Raja Ramanna, who was there, who was the father, the bomb master, was watching. He told me that he had seen the actual thing was that the counting stopped. And the counting stopped not because there was some problem with the machinery. The rule was that if it stops, that means there's some problem with the bomb. It stopped because of the most mundane of Indian reasons. The mic failed. And so Raja Ramanna was, oops, he thought it wasn't working. And suddenly the thing lifted as he described it. It just went up like that. And he was so excited. He was sitting in a machan at a great distance. And he wanted to come running down. And he forgot. The greatest scientist that we had in terms of the bomb forgot that there is an earthquake after that. And so the earth began to rumble, and in his moment of triumph, Raja Ramanna found himself sprawled in the deserts of Rajasthan eating sand. He can't forgive himself for that. But there were others who made issues which I'll not get into. But there's a very interesting story about how this word, the Buddha is smiling, came, which was a sort of code word, as it was, where Mrs. Gandhi was told by the scientists that the Buddha was smiling, and that's why we knew the test was, and everyone thought it was not very apt. It wasn't the password. It wasn't the code word. Again, the most mundane of Indian things that happened. Homi Setna, who's the chairman, calls up the principal secretary to the Prime Minister and says, Mr. Dar, before he could complete, as he says, the lines went kaput. The phone broke down. And he said, they must have thought the bomb was not working. So then they had to go and wire it and go to a local post office there. Those days you didn't have cell phones and all. We're talking 30 years back where we had terrible telephone systems, so this young generation won't understand it. They had to go to a public telephone. In the meanwhile, the army exchange cranked up and they got through to the Prime Minister. And it was the then Chief of Army Staff, General Babur, who told Dhar that Sab Anand hai, which meant that everything was there. And finally, Setna got the line from the post office. After the exchange guy said, who the hell are you? And then he called up to say, ma'am, this is 20 kiloton, this, that. Mrs. Gandhi's reaction was, she was meeting people when Dhar, a smile flit across her face. She said, oh, well, tell the world, tell the Russian ambassador, tell everybody else. So the foreign secretary was summoned. The principal secretary called up the Russian ambassador and he said, we have just conducted a nuclear test. So Maltsev asked Dhar, was the test successful? So he said, Ambassador, if it wasn't successful, I won't call you. So that was, and of course, we've talked about Raja Ramanna, but an interesting statistics is if you thought India was doing it then, we were a reluctant nuclear power. When we did our test, there were already 1,256 tests done across the world. USA had done 747 tests by then. USSR 400, France 54, Great Britain 27, China 50. So in 1974, India really moved down the curve, and that's been a subject of great controversy. Why did we do it so slowly? If we were going to do it, we should have done it. I mean, we're ahead of China in the nuclear thing. But I think, like everything else, As I said, there are no accidents. This was a deliberate thought. We were not a nation that was in a rush to show our macho, muscular prowess. We debated, we were a democratic country, we thought about it, we worked it, we were a poor country, we needed the money for other things. We wanted a world free of nuclear weapons. Let's be very clear. Neither you nor I can support a weapon, I'm sure, that can cause such enormous destruction. I can't imagine we should be doing that. And so we have to work towards it. Whatever we do, we need to work towards that progress, to make what is called global zero in terms of nuclear weapons. So India must demonstrate that. It cannot be like others, like Pakistan, which has now put up 4 nuclear plants and can rain death on us. We have to show the world, we still have to tell the world while protecting ourselves that is enough. The world at that time had what is called mutually assured destruction. Each of these weapons, the belief was that if you had to deter someone else from destroying you, you had to have enough weapons to destroy him completely, which means you had to make sure that his destruction was assured and he would not press the button. That was the key in this thing. So America and Soviet Union at that time built close to 28,000. America had 28,000 nuclear weapons. USSR had 17,000, enough to blast the entire universe if it wanted to. But that was the balance that they had to keep, the balance of terror. If you didn't have that, one nation might get adventurous and strike you. You didn't want to do that. And that's the problem with nuclear weapons. You have to keep assuring, building enough so that the other person knows that if he strikes you, you will destroy every single city of his, and nobody would be there. There are no winners in nuclear war, only survivors. Quickly, we have Kalam, who I worked closely with in terms of the book. And if you built a bomb, you had to have something to deliver it. And we saw what Agni did. I showed the initial part of that, Agni 5. You needed something that could reach, that nobody else could strike you with. And it's so quick that interception only now is being thought of, but otherwise no one can stop a missile from reaching you. Once you press the button, it's gone. No stopping it. And so we needed to build that capability. I'm going to fast forward all that just to show you Kalam in his younger days. That's him with all that long hair. He got away with it even then. I'm skipping this because I understand, and I'm coming quickly to 1989, where nuclear reality sets in. Pakistan is ahead of us with the bomb. Rajiv Gandhi is a reluctant nuclear believer. He doesn't want. He, in fact, addressed a conference in 1998 for universal nuclear disarmament, which means the world should put an end to weapons. He doesn't want. He tells the people, also the scientists, you can go ahead with your experiments, but then he gets information from intelligence that Pakistan has turned the proverbial last screw. They can rain death on us. That is when he gives the order that we will weaponize our nuclear. What does weaponization mean? It means that you have to build a certain number of nuclear weapons. Thought to be then by General Sundarji, who put together the paper at 150 nuclear weapons. It would mean a strategy that you would ensure that no country, neither Pakistan or China, our two great hostile neighbors, would be able to tackle us on the nuclear front. And once you put the number, then you have to have the delivery vehicles. That time we were looking at aircraft, Mirage initially, the Mirage aircraft. First the Jags, but that's a different story, the Jaguars. And then we moved to Mirage. And it was only in May 1994 that the first successful test took place. It's stunning. I mean, we did our first nuclear test in 1974. We actually were only able to drop it once successfully in 1994. We could have done it, but it was a crude type earlier. So it took 20 years, lots of complaints by the services. Why did we do so much? We can discuss this if we want to. But the fact is we are a reluctant nuclear power. Then came the 1998 tests. And very quickly, this is what got me the award, so it's a bit self-serving. But this is the first and only picture that they ever permitted, which is what I scooped in journalistic terms, of one of India's nuclear bombs being lowered for the test. The scientists did a huge subterfuge that was very successful. They avoided CIA spy satellites by building control towers that were camouflaged, by speaking in code language, by wearing army fatigues, so that when the satellites peeped down, since that was an army range, they would not be able to detect what was going on out there. They were able to successfully test 6 of these devices. These are just some pictures from there. That's the atom bomb site. I've got a little movie for you all if you have the time, I don't know. Just about 6 minutes, if it's okay with you all. And I did something soon after that because they're supposed to have tested a hydrogen bomb, but the test results went very successful. And on India Today cover, I wrote, "Is hydrogen bomb, is India's H-bomb a dud?" The scientists didn't speak to me for 2 years. They were most upset. But we had to ask the tough question on this. There are still issues, but I think we've cleared the hurdle on that front. This is the site of the hydrogen bomb, and as you can see, as compared to the earlier sites, this is the atom bomb, this is the hydrogen bomb. Not much went off. The bell can still be seen where this army gentleman is standing. But the scientists said they'd calculated for it, and therefore they're confident of the yield. This is when Vajpayee declared that India is now a nuclear weapons state, and our story is beginning to come to end. Because Pakistan then went ahead and did what it did. It exploded 6 of them, got nuclear parity with us, and we were back on a balance of terror. Kargil war happened, and our nuclear weapons were kept ready. They actually moved them to Jalandhar. So on the first occasion that happened, soon after both of us exploded, what was to be a deterrent, we actually saber-rattled our nuclear weapons. And that's a point to ponder about. So we've got a new balance of terror. Each one of us I'll skip this thing. We are looking for what is called a minimum credible deterrent, which means can we deter the foe with the numbers that we have? So we're building missiles. We've got the range that is there. I've already played the Agni video. We are now moved to Su-30s for our missile strike. We are building, almost perfected our submarine. Why do you need a nuclear sub? You run silent, you run deep, you can't detect it. The whole point is you must, because we believe in what is called no first use, you must have delivery weapons where you can strike your enemy at will, anywhere, anytime, and therefore a nuclear sub can be hidden. Nobody knows where it is. It can go great distances and bomb any country that tries to threaten. So we need to keep that. We are getting towards our triad. This is the total number of nuclear weapons in the world today, 20,000 weapons. India has about 100 of them, less, 50 they say. Pakistan's got about 100. What do we do? Where do we go from here? We had the nuclear deal. I think it was a very good deal. If someone's interested, I can talk to them about it. But we need power. Nuclear currently gives only 3%. So even if we need the weapons, we also need power. We can boost nuclear to about 10%. It's a very cheap form of this thing. If you look at what we would do, if you had to do the same kind of generation, you have 1 truckload of uranium can give you as much energy as 26 lakh tons of coal, 200,000 tons of oil. You've seen the ratios. There are problems of pollution. We need to talk about it. We still have this thing. And the big question then, what if? I simulated what would happen if a bomb fell on Connaught Place. If Pakistan bombed us there, what would happen? That's how Connaught Place, I don't know if you've seen Delhi's Connaught Place, there'd be nothing left. So the nuke button is just to push away. What do we do? Pakistan says that if we ever invade India, there's a nuclear threshold. That if we take territory of theirs that is more than what they think, they would bomb us with a nuclear thing. If we threaten them economically, they would bomb us with it. They don't believe in no first use, they believe in first strike. If we cause any domestic destabilization by raining terror on them, by sending terrorists across, they would use the nuclear weapon. They were quick on the nuclear threshold. If we believe that, we should have bombed Pakistan long back with what they did with 2611 and other things. We believe in no first use. That makes us even more difficult in terms of keeping the numbers so that they can survive a strike from Pakistan and then we can strike back. So there's a thing called 7 minutes to midnight. where people are keeping the nuclear clock ticking. When will the world come to an end? When would some stupid general decide that he should win a war by throwing nuclear weapons? And what do we need to do to end that? This is a question the entire humanity faces. If you look, we've built 1,28,000 nuclear weapons. Today, as I said earlier, more than 25,000 weapons exist. Can we come to global zero? I'll end with a little parable, which I ended my book with. It's why the Buddha really smiled. And this, strangely enough, came from my Guru Bharat Thakur when he was reading my book and I was searching for an end. And he came up with this odd example, an odd parable. And he said, why don't you talk about Angulimala? Terrible with these things. I was bad in school. And I said, oh, who was he? Angulimala apparently was a dacoit that lived during Buddha's times in the forests of Taxila. And his great skill was that he would kill people, murder them, take all their riches, and cut off their little finger and use it as a mala and put it across his neck. And he had killed so many people that he had this huge mala of little fingers across. Buddha walked into the forest that day, and Angulimala was used to people being extremely scared of him. His reputation preceded it. The Buddha looked unconcerned, quiet, just blank, unafraid. Angulimala is struck. Aren't you afraid of me? Do you know who I am? I'm Angulimala, the killer of so many people. Buddha said, you think you have power? Get me this branch. Get me a branch from there, from this tree. So Angulimala laughed, how? You want me to demonstrate power just by breaking a twig or a branch? I'll do that. He grabs the branch, breaks it and comes to Buddha and says, see? And then Buddha says, if you think you're really powerful, now go and fit that branch back in the tree. That is true power. True power is not destruction. True power is construction. True power is preservation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raj. Friends, we have about 20 minutes to take a few questions. Please don't mind if we can't accommodate all of you. Please introduce yourself and then make a quick comment or ask a short question, please. Yes, sir. Coming to you.
Yes. Yes, please.
Mr. Raj Chengappa, my name is E.P. Menon. You may remember when you were working the City tab, you were friends. To understand whatever you said, I took 3 years, walked from New Delhi to Hiroshima, via Moscow, Paris, London, and Washington. And I congratulate you, every word, I agree with you. Now, you deserve a Nobel Prize, but you will never get it, because the structure in the world today is that which prevents you from getting it. So, my question is, the greatest democracy of the world is the maximum arms manufacturers in the world. And the largest democracy of the world is the maximum buyer of arms in the world. How do we deal with this?
Very good question. Thank you. Thank you. I think the question, goes far, far beyond the subject that we talked about. It's both philosophical and I am afraid it'll take a little while to answer it, and I may not be fully competent to do that. As I said, we've got to work out, when I began the talk, the reasons why we are in conflict. Why do we as nations fight? Where can we get to what we're doing without using these destructive weapons? Can we get to global zero? Does India have an option? I don't think we had an option when it came to building the bomb, leave alone acquiring nuclear weapons, weapons of conventional nature. If we didn't you and I wouldn't be sitting here talking freely, discussing this subject. There is an imperative in life that we need to do. And this, I think, our leaders realized when in fact, Nehru's whole thought was, I am not saying no to nuclear weapons because I do not have the capacity to build them. I am saying no to nuclear weapons, and when we shun the nuclear weapons, it is because we can build them, and we speak from a position of strength that we will say no to them. How do we end this global madness? Where does it stop? Have we reached the point of no return? We thought wars would come to an end once nuclear weapons came into it, that the balance of terror would ensure that no party would strike the other and harm them physically. It hasn't happened. We've had wars continuously. We are now in the midst of major wars. We are still settling our conflicts with the use of terrific force, terrible force. There are no easy answers, Mr. Menon, as to how we should proceed, where we should go. It has to be a search. We, as human beings, have done tremendous search outward. We've explored the outer reaches of space. We've extended what our arms and legs to the deepest parts of the universe. We've extended our brains beyond this circumference skull that we have to extreme measures. And yet, we are unable to come up with solutions that deal with simple human problems of resolving conflict. It is a point to ponder. I wouldn't want to give too many answers. I think it's a great question to ask each one of us. Does it come through individuals searching for peace within? But what happens then? It is not in isolation. What is the impact that would happen if someone else then comes and just bumps you off? If you're not protected? Where does your peace come if you're under tremendous stress all the time? Can you ensure if your neighbor is aggressive? How do you convince him that this is not it? And you can see that the race, as we go along, we are proceeding, if we don't watch out, to an annihilation. I'm sorry to say so. But there are sensible voices. There are people that are there. And we all need to come together to think of what you're saying. Thank you. Yeah.
Sir, my name is George Karimundikal, and I have a question about how we managed to build a bomb in the first place. I mean, most countries who have nuclear weapons now probably either acquired it by espionage or they were helped by some other countries. China probably helped Pakistan. Elements in the Pakistani nuclear establishment probably sold secrets to North Korea. The Americans probably helped the English. The Russians probably helped the Chinese. Did we get any help from Russia? Did we acquire secrets through espionage? Do you know anything about that?
You know, most of America's top scientists that built the bomb were actually German refugees or Hungarian refugees or European refugees. The person that built their missile capability was also a German scientist who had defected. So it isn't like you didn't have cross-pollination even in the greatest military present today. We have largely been, I trust, and I believe so, self-reliant in the way we did, and that is why the huge struggle that we had to build and the years that we took to do that. No one gives you nuclear technology easily, unless it comes, if they do, it comes with a huge price. And so Pakistan is paying that price. China gave Pakistan all its test and design, but it's virtually a colonized country of China at the moment, or with any other nation. It has no independent thought. We, as Nehru, we had for 300 years or more been dominated by other powers. And so self-reliance became a mantra for us, because we didn't want to go back to that subjugation again. And so we struggled and we built, and I think largely what we have done, we may have had a little help from the Soviets at some point, but I don't think they gave us the kind of weapon design that China gave Pakistan. They didn't give us issues. We might have had issues of machining. There was a point where we were allowed to see the Purnima reactor, pulse reactor, which when I told you about machining plutonium, the scientists were allowed to go there and get Purnima reactor, but that was for peaceful purposes, but it helped us machine plutonium. We had problems with our plutonium reprocessing plant, which we sorted out ourselves. That's why it took 10 years. We had other help, we would have sorted it out more. So I think, and even our missiles, nobody was willing to sell us this kind of Agni and stuff. They were willing to give us this. And only when we reached a point where we could show that we could do it, then they came up with these various offers that we can do it better and, you know, give us a chance. So it's a kind of a sawtooth kind of approach to technology. When we reached the top of the curve, they'd say, all right, we'll give you the technology, but we didn't want it. So I think by and large, to answer your question briefly, we've done it ourselves.
Commodore Franklin, class of 61, Pettigrew House. When do you think terrorists are going to get a hand at the bomb? And second part, what then?
It's very difficult to build a bomb. You need state machinery. You saw the laboratories that I showed you. They are large and huge, and you need billions of rupees to do that kind of thing. Terrorists don't have that kind of access to money. They'd be easily detected. Second, the nature of the physics of the bomb is so very difficult that, as I said, you require intense machining, calculations, a kind of a prowess, a technological prowess that very few terrorist organizations can even, nobody practically can do. What they can do is a couple of things. One is what is called a dirty bomb, which is that you pick up radioactive substances in sufficient large numbers, and that's the fear if you're not monitoring the world properly in terms of nuclear reactors, and you get hold of loose nuclear material. By the way, nuclear material is very difficult to get. I told you we couldn't do our first test till 1974 because we didn't have plutonium, a large country like ours, which had so many plutonium reactors. So it's very difficult to get that, to do it. You have to cook the substance in reactors. So you have loose material in various places, which needs, that's why you have the International Atomic Energy, where every single gram of nuclear material produced in the world, except in the ones that are in secret facilities, are monitored and kept in safe places. If people got hold of that material, what they can do is to contaminate your water sources, explode a conventional bomb with a bit of nuclear thing in it, which means that if you did that in Brigade Road, for instance, you wouldn't be able to walk in Brigade Road for 20 to 30 years because of the nuclear radiation that is there. So you do have that kind of threat that is there, and that is why I think the world should move towards a more monitored. That's why the nuclear deal was important, for India to get on board. That is why I think we have to restrict the ability of other nations and non-state actors to get hold of this material. It is in our great interest that we work towards a world that is free of nuclear weapons, because at some point the genie would be out of the bottle and you would have problems.
My name is Dr. Shastri. I'm not a Cottonian, but I'm grateful for having been invited. I think we would be terrible frauds if we say we have nuclear weapons and we are not willing to use them. It would be sending the wrong signal to everybody, including to our young generation, because right now Pakistan is building what is called tactical nuclear weapons, where I believe they hope to nuke an attacking Indian army formation, and they're hoping that that India would not react, that the politicians would say, oh, it's just a few army men gone, we are not hit, so we will not retaliate. This is not right. We must be ready to retaliate. The other person has to be scared. We have to see what happens if a bomb falls on Rawalpindi, and not what happens if a bomb falls on Connaught Place for him to be afraid.
Point. You know, this is a very strange, there's many theories going around called the stability-instability paradox. We are apparently stable because both of us have nuclear weapons, but we're also unstable because there could be some mad general from across the border who decides that he'd either use tactical nuclear weapons to prevent an Indian army offensive, or decide that he would like to go ahead and bomb India in any case. The answer to that is that we are not pacifists. We didn't build these bombs for show. We didn't put up muscle just to say that we have them, and therefore we would deter Pakistan from doing it. Work is on in the laboratories, as far as I've understood, where we have built the kind of capability that can survive a first strike if Pakistan strikes any of our cities. We have a succession in place in case the Prime Minister is killed and all the top ministers and everybody else is killed, as to who would take the orders. There is a nuclear plan laid out and a survival plan laid out which says what we will do in the event and how we will get back at them. The various cores of the nuclear material are dispersed into various areas, as are our missiles, and most of our missiles are now being made mobile and canister oriented, which means that you can't detect where they are. They're not necessarily silo based, and they can move at great distances and great speed, so we can evade any of these people. We are in a readiness position of half an hour in the event of a nuclear attack, but we mustn't forget nuclear attacks don't come as a surprise, which means that you would know that a war is building up before it comes, unless there's really something very stupid that happens. But for various reasons, the Indian nuclear establishment follows, through much of the angst of the armed forces in India, a kind of policy where there'll be 3 decision makers that would take the call, not take the call, but would be responsible for initiating a counter-attack, which is the DRDO, which will bring in the missiles, the Atomic Energy Establishment, which is in charge of the cores, which are stored in various vaults, nobody knows where, hidden deep inside in layers of concrete to avoid an attack. And these would be mated instantly, as I said, the half-an-hour gap, at secret places where targets would have been determined, and we would strike at the time and point of our choosing. So I have no doubt that if Pakistan thinks that despite whatever that I spoke about and the need for us to move towards global zero, that in the event of an attack, India would give them a very fitting answer. But as I said, I hope it doesn't happen. It's unfortunate, but I think they know that we have the capability to do that.
Good morning.
Sorry, who? Okay, this you should actually, his question was that, what should we go for, enriched uranium or plutonium? We went the plutonium route because we had the Canadian reactors. It's actually a very technical question, but the fact was what is easier to make. If you went the enriched uranium, you had to build giant uranium centrifuges, which is, as I said, nuclear material is so complex that you had to spin these centrifuges at great speed to move out the proper radioactive content of uranium that is necessary to enrich it to 90%. That takes a long time. Pakistan went by that route, has mastered that. It has now moved to plutonium route. We have also done the same. We've also started moving on we have an enrichment plant, I think not too far from here, Mysore, if I'm not mistaken, where we enrich uranium. It's essentially to build the amount of material we have. I think we've been very clever with what we did with the US nuclear deal. We have kept a certain number of our reactors out of the hands of any monitoring agency. Essentially, to produce nuclear material from a regular reactor, you have to, as I said, the word is cook. It just happens to be that, is you keep it in certain temperatures. And you allow the uranium, therefore, to burn in a way that relieves the residual of plutonium, which you can then use, which you can collect. The ratio is so high, it takes 1 ton of I think regular uranium fuel to produce 1 kg or 10 kgs of uranium. So you can imagine the kind of stress, this thing that is there. But what we have done, apart from these 2 things that we've done in terms of building capacity to get the hard stuff, the material that causes the bomb, is that we have miniaturized these things. So if you saw the Agni core, the first bomb we built was like the Fat Boy. Today, our bombs are like this, like golf balls. They're less than 300 kgs, 400 kgs. They're largely atom. I believe we do have the hydrogen alternative, though there are scientists that have raised controversy on it. It's untested, but should we go for a test, not go for a test? In that sense, we've only done 1 test. But what we've done is we've then been able to miniaturize this and move into multiple bombs if we want to load them into missiles and others. That's a great scientific achievement that has gone very quietly in the laboratories. So there's lots being done on this to answer more in detail. That it is not that India has, got a woolly notion of what the world should be like. We're highly pragmatic. We're not ideological. That business of moral speechifying has long since ended. We believe in real politics now. We are not lulled into complacency of any kind. From whatever I can gather, we have the wherewithal to do what we are doing well.
Good morning. My name is Bharat Kandade. I happen to be from the 1963 batch and also from the 1973 batch of Dr. Epan's Department of Journalism. So Chengappa was also a graduate from there. I have the suggestion to take you back in history, since you said we shouldn't be compliant with moral issues, but going back to the Kalinga War, it transformed Ashoka, and he made an army of missionaries who went round and conquered the eastern side and put Buddhism across right up to Japan. So we have a moral rearmament issue here. Question is, can India take on the post of being a superpower, and can we moralize and get this generation of Buddhists around the world to be our emissaries for peace?
Good question. I mean, but I think the answer lies in firstly transforming India before we begin to police the world or think of ourselves as a superpower of any kind. I think one of our earlier speakers talked of poverty, of primary education, of problems that we face, day-to-day problems that we face in our country. We're still a country that has 30 to 40% steeped in poverty, far below the poverty line. We are a privileged lot that stays here. The task of the nation before we start transforming the world is to first transform ourselves, to build ourselves, to make every person feel equal in every respect, which means giving him food, clothing, shelter, proper education, roads, transport. That is the mission of India. That is where our young people, our young boys, our young students come and play. This is your future. You can take the nation to greater heights. We've tried, I think we've failed largely. We've done a little bit here and there, but the world is open to you all. There is a new India that you need to transform. We've got the wherewithal, we're growing at a very good rate, but there's so much to be done. We need to be world leaders in technology. We need to be world leaders in terms of what we do in schools and our education system. That's why I think it's so important what is happening in Bishop Cotton's and other schools. Without the skills, we can't get anywhere. So we first have to do it ourselves before we begin to look ahead and see whether we should take on the world in any ways. We do that, we demonstrate to the world we can do it, they will listen to us. Yes, we then have the moral right and also the philosophical underpinning that this great nation has, which was thought long back as to how the world should progress. And we can bring that all into play at that time.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Siddharth Raja. I'm not a Cottonian, and like the other gentleman mentioned, I'm very grateful for being here, especially considering that I'm from the other school down the road.
Here comes Cottons, take off your hats.
But this is a brilliant lecture series, and I must congratulate it's a fantastic, and it's particularly grateful to listen to your very somber presentation. I have a specific question actually with regard to Iran and its nuclear attempts to get the nuclear technology. You mentioned that India has struggled in the 60s to get its own nuclear capabilities done indigenously. And since you've probably seen the policymakers from close, what is your view on Indian policy with regard to what the Iranian government and the Iranian nation is seeking to achieve in terms of getting access to nuclear power for peaceful purposes in terms of generation, for generating of fuel, because the same technology has its dual use? And where does India stand vis-a-vis the posturing that goes on between the US and the Iranian regime? I guess the problem lies partly with the nature of that regime, but from the perspective of the access to nuclear power that the Iranian people probably would like in terms of security, where does India see its position in coming from its own needs for energy security in this country? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can't answer for India. That is too big a task. But if you look at it, if you look at what Iran's done, Iran signed the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which I mentioned in 1968. If you signed that under agreement, if you took any assistance to build reactors of any kind, you were under obligation to not only allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to come and inspect every single facility of yours, count every gram of or milligram of uranium or nuclear material that goes from you. You had to also ensure that there would be no diversion
of any of this to weaponization. Iran has crossed many, many such red lines and therefore deserves to be told no. And India's approach should be that. We didn't sign the NPT. We had every right to go ahead and do what we had to do. We said that was a wrong treaty. We don't believe in it. And as I mentioned, and as the question earlier, we built the bomb ourselves. Iranians are trying through a subterfuge. That's not all. Then what's the value of an international compact, a treaty? And therefore, whatever is necessary to do to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons in this clandestine manner has to be done. We might have centuries-old relationship with Iran. We are great friends of theirs. But when it comes to this, this is serious business. They have no business doing it, and we must move in any international forum to prevent Iran from acquiring it, because then you might as well let everybody else. The genie, as I said, will be out of the bag. Then you'll want, Saudi will say, I need it. Someone else will say, I need it. Every nation needs it. Then we'll have a world full of nuclear weapons and you'll never know when it's going to end.
There's a President Kadoni who has a question.
Oh.
After which, Mr. Khalili has a question. Sudhir Krishna and General Sundaram.
Okay.
And I'm not so sure if we'll have too much time after that. There's a PC there on the right who has a question, please. Yeah, no, in front. He had his hand up first. We'll come back to you.
I can take two. Speaker's privilege.
Sir, 1 minute. Just 1 second.
Good morning, sir. My name is Sanjit. I'm a present Catonian, also incidentally from Pettigrew House.
Oh.
So my question is, sir,
sorry, Pope.
So my question basically.
This is not a bias by me, okay? I don't know.
So my question basically is, so now as we know, France has a private player in nuclear energy, which is Riva, and they play a very important role in their nuclear energy policy. So sir, do you see a private player in India giving us a major part of our nuclear energy at any point of time, the viability of a private player in nukes in India?
Sanjit, that's a very good question, and not because you're from Pettigrew House. And it's a question that I raced through when I was talking about the Indo-US nuclear deal, which precisely, why did we get into the deal? We were a pariah state the moment we exploded our weapons, and there was no nuclear cooperation allowed to us because of this thing. There were various acts that were brought in, including from various countries that built the bombs themselves, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, or countries that had uranium and could supply as fuel. So for many years, we struggled with our existing nuclear plants to build our own plants as well as take our own resources in terms of uranium to do that. Now, the result was two things. One, our progress was very slow, but of course, we built our reliance. Two, we just have that much uranium available to put up 10,000 megawatts of nuclear power, which, and one of the quick graphics that I showed, is about 3%, 4% of our total requirement of power. That's too little. Foreign energy, as you know, climate change is coming, where if you fire coal or other forms of energy, oil, you're burning carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide into the air, and that causes enormous global warming. So if we have to move down the path, the nuclear path is something that we need to look at. The nuclear deal allowed us to break this pariah status that we had for so long by saying two things. It protected our strategic program, where it said that yes, India is entitled to keep its nuclear weapons and its reactors and other facilities. They will not come under inspection to do what it has to do to keep its arsenal ready. But at the same time, India agrees to open out all its other nuclear energy plants, which is for power, peaceful uses of it, to international inspection. And in return, we would be allowed to get two things: technology, which is where Riva comes in, which they are the world's largest manufacturer of nuclear plants, and uranium, which is where Australia and Stephen Harper was here. And one of the most ticklish deals was, how do you convince Australia, where their own states are against the use of nuclear power, to export uranium to us? They have one of the world's largest resources of uranium. So how do we get that? And this agreement allows us to import, as we have already done from various countries, to bring in uranium so essential. Therefore, our nuclear program can go from 10,000 megawatts to 40 to 50,000 megawatts in the space of 10 years. And as you know, power is an issue. You go anywhere in this country, there's power cuts that are 8 hours, 10 hours. Where will we get the power? So let's harness that energy for a peaceful purpose. And Ariva and others, we for too long, just as we did with industry, believe that the nuclear industry should be in the public sector or in the government sector. I think as we found and grown in strength and technology, we can absorb what other technologies are giving us without being subjugated. And we've built that learning curve and we are very high on that. So now we can allow foreign companies, Russia we've already bought in Kudankulam, Ariva we are entering into various agreements that is there. There are some problems of liability which we need to sort out. From America we're getting this thing. Japan is also planning to sell us. So I think the only way we can build the capacity to reach the 40,000 megawatts is not only do that indigenously and not allow our indigenous program to suffer, so we're not again put at a technological disadvantage, but also get the technology that they have and learn from them, because our reactors, we built about 800 megawatts, 1,000 megawatt reactors, they can go to 2,000 megawatts. Giant reactors, so why not get their technology? So I think the future that you're looking at could happen if we can move down that path. Anyone?
Question? Mr. Khalili?
Ambassador, I'm almost afraid to take your question.
No. It might be useful to know how the North Koreans are setting about. Everyone's concentrating on Iran. I won't comment on Iran because my views are very different to everyone. But as far as North Korea as a country so isolated, how is it managing and what does it mean?
Very good question, Ambassador. Difficult to answer because North Korea is now a nuclear weapons power. Acknowledged, however clandestinely it did what it did and broke away like Iran did and did its own thing, though it signed the NPT. It's clear that they do have the weapons. That raises very troubling questions, because if you don't come down very hard on North Korea, then why should you come down hard on Iran? Why come down hard on any country that begins to divert its peaceful nuclear uses to one of building weapons? So North Korea in many senses is an example of how we should handle the problem. If we don't, we are losing the battle in some senses. North Korea was assisted by Pakistan, by A.Q. Khan, who in return for their missiles was also allowed a certain nuclear technology that was there. China has also indirectly played a role, but I would be surprised if China does more than just that. They need to also be worried about a North Korean missile. So it's a very troubling question, because you now have from when we exploded it, we were the 6th nuclear power. Before us, there was USA, which as I showed you, did the first bomb. Then we had the Soviet Union, followed by Britain, then by France, then by China in 1964, and India in 1974, and finally Pakistan in 1998, along with us when we did ours. And of course, Pakistan had to prove parity. So we had done 6 tests, 1 plus 5 in 1974 and 1998, 5. Pakistan did 6 tests in 1998, so test-wise we're equal. But then you had Israel, which is a recessed power, and that has been again a very troubling question as to why Israel should be out of the ambit in terms of any weapons control program. And that is the leverage that a lot of these other countries and America and others begin to shake in terms of how do you answer that question, because it is a fact that Israel has about 100 nuclear weapons, assisted in some senses by the US and others, but tremendous technological capability. They didn't sign the NPT, so they can get away, as Pakistan and India didn't. So they don't have a moral obligation in that sense. But the Israel question is as big as the North Korean question or this. For the Middle East and Iran, they say, well, Israel's getting away with it. Why are you allowing them to get away? What about us then? Tomorrow Israel can rain a nuclear bomb on us and they have the balance of power in their favor. So these are issues that we need to, it's not an easy question, as my friend had said, asked me, Mr. Menon, as to what are the big solutions. Even as we try to work the nuclear global zero, you would see so many contradictions that is not easy to put together. There are national ambitions, there is a national psyche, there are international concerns, and but we do need to get together. I mean, and some of these nations like Iran and others have to be made an example, however serious it is when we do it.
No, sir, please, you'll have to wait, sir. Sudhir was in the queue. I'm sorry.
I actually work for an institution founded by Homi Bhabha. I work for TIFR, so very familiar with some of the stuff. I'm very curious about, have you thought about the institutional structures for the 21st century? You know, because a lot of what you talk about is very complex, very interdisciplinary, and do we have the institutional structures, or do we have to create new institutions, or can we restructure existing institutions to deal with the kind of complexity that you've talked about, and on the scale that it's required?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question and has to do with scientific leadership. And where do we go from here? If you see the early parts of our progress, we had the Atomic Energy Commission, and that's largely because of Bhabha, and the entire nuclear establishment is public sector, in the sense government. Whatever we do is made by them through their various institutions, as with the Space Department. But Space Department is a good example of how you can start moving out of that era of having a specialized organization do everything under one roof in it. Just as what we have done in our economic program, where we have liberalized and allowed private industry to come in a big way and manufacture, and allowed the freedom of entrepreneurship and the spirit of entrepreneurship to grow. What we need to do on the nuclear establishment front is that for too long they were the Maharajas, they were the crown jewels of Indian science. They need to be now dispersed. There is enough private sector. The universities should be strengthened considerably. Colleges and schools like ours should move towards research, where you can do a lot of the nuclear research as it happens in the US and other places, where we needn't be afraid. We're all patriotic. We are not going to sell our secrets to some foreign country because we happen to be at the cutting edge of it. And vest a lot of this knowledge that we have, take it and put the investments in various other institutions, and in fact privatize a lot of our production. In terms of, but particularly the nuclear plants. We don't have to do everything in-house on that. So the power sector can be completely privatized, as we're doing now, and we talked earlier on this front. And then you can have centers of excellence. NASA, for instance, doesn't make any more, the National Aeronautical Space Establishment does not make any more, doesn't make spacecraft anymore. It's Boeing that does it, or, the other giant aircraft companies that do that. I've visited their complexes, and they build military satellites. Boeing builds military satellites for the US Army. So I can't, and if you isolate it and you build in various things, there's no reason why our private sector shouldn't rise. So to answer your question, I think we should start dispersing this a lot, building a military industrial capability which is beyond government. The more we keep it within government, we have scarce resources, and our resources should be spent in doing essential development things, and that, give the scope for private industry. The problem with us is we build these things in isolation. We're islands of excellence, and we need to break that. We need to have a sea of excellence. General.
I'm General Sundaram. I have had the fortune to be with, I've been interviewed with Chengappa, of course, nearly 45 years in the missile field. And the question on self-reliance. We need self-reliance in critical technologies. We don't have to do everything. But what has been denied both in the missile field and the nuclear field are the critical technologies, and both government and the military-industrial complex, which Chengappa talked about, have to concentrate on this. It doesn't remain just in the labs. It has to come through industry also, and then we'll be able to produce it. And I can say, as I've been a mission director for nearly 50 launches of the Prithvi and Dhanush, and I cleared the Agni 5 as one of the members, which was taken off. I think India did develop these critical technologies on their own. There was no AQ Khan. I just want to confirm that. But there's a lot of self-reliance required in many other areas, leave alone missiles and bombs, which India is not doing. I hope you will do that. And also, this tactical news which you talked about must be banned. There is a move already. It's a very, very dangerous little lever. And then you get it. Everybody accepts the big ones don't do it. But these tacticals which are subcritical, people talk about. I think we need an all-out assault, including from Chengappa, to build up an opinion against the tactical nuclear weapon. Thank you.
Thank you, General Sundaram. I'm very happy and privileged that you are here to listen to it. He's been a great son of India and was responsible for being the crack missile team and putting together many of India's missiles. I agree with you on self-reliance and the need to keep focus it on critical technology and keep it to that and not get into all other areas. With regard to attack nuclear weapons, the argument put very simply is, for my young friends there, is that just like we'd use artillery fire and others, the idea is that you would stop an advancing army by firing a nuclear weapon over this entire core that is there and in one shot destroy them or at least prevent them from coming in. Now the point is, Pakistan or someone can argue and say, look, I never really wanted, it is not the reign of terror on cities. This is another form of, if you can use aircraft to bomb us and kill us, and you can use your artillery fire and everything else, why can't we be allowed to use nuclear weapons to do the same job that we would do? These are combat people. They are not citizens of any kind. The counter force, this is what they call counter force is counter value. Counter value is ones there where you hit the cities, where you terrorize cities. So why can't it be a legitimate weapon of war? Good question. The only reason why it isn't is because you cannot calibrate the response of the opponent. Now, if Pakistan explodes, for instance, we go into an invasion and offensive against Pakistan, it explodes a tactical weapon on top of our troops that is advancing in the western sector. We are not sure whether this is going to stop with a tactical nuclear weapon. We are not going to wait to be sure. We will turn around. We are not going to wait till Delhi is destroyed and everyone else is destroyed. Very quickly, a tactical nuclear weapon, tactical nuclear assault will mount to a full-scale nuclear war because you cannot calibrate rational reaction because you don't know what the other side is doing. So one side unleashes attack weapon on you, you will say, buddy, you've done the strike. I'm coming right back with you. Before you know it, Lahore is gone, Rawalpindi is gone, Karachi is gone, you name every major city, India would have launched its weapons. Okay, so I don't think that, and I agree with General Sundaram, that we need to look at bringing sense into a lot of people, though we did do in our test certain attack weapons also. It's not like India doesn't have them. The sub-kiloton tests that we did at Pokhran in 1998 did validate our prowess. General Sundaram can correct me if I'm wrong. But the fact is that there is a need to tell the world that you can't keep doing this. I think we've now reduced in terms of strategic arms talks and limitation talks. America and Russia has reduced the number of missiles from close to 25,000 to about 7,000 now. They are continuing this thing, but they are also perfecting better and better weapons. So if it's only a notional reduction, what they're doing is what they could do with 25,000, they can do with 5,000 or 6,000. So they're building compact, more lethal weapons. It is not like they're saying that's over. But and they're doing the second thing, that there's no more nuclear head trigger situation that is there, which is that, boom, like the Cuban Missile Crisis. You're never sure what the other one is doing. So you press the button. And there have been issues of what they call broken arrow, where a nuclear weapon is lost or there's been a problem where they think a nuclear strike has happened, and America has then steadily kept the button away. There was a time when there was launch on attack, where an ordinary, commander of an aircraft could go and bomb, use a nuclear bomb. But that's over. They've kept the steps far, but the danger exists. So I think we do need to open the debate on attack nuclear weapons and see how we can restrict it. Ambassador.
If we want to expand our nuclear program, the problem of disposal of waste will come up. Peter Kapitz's suggestion of putting them in waste in rockets and sending to the sun, would it have more danger to be? There may be space debris, nuclear debris in space. We don't want that either. Is there a way of dealing with nuclear waste other than that, though?
Excellent question, Ambassador, and I think that the nuclear atomic energy establishment should think about this thing. Space is, of course, a tricky business. So we've already have enough dirt and debris up there with our satellites and the problem of them collapsing. I don't think we should look at that option at the moment. What we need to do is to, and this is the dirty part of the nuclear business, is that any nuclear waste you have can last for many generations of our families, 1,000 years. They are radioactive and they have to be kept in concrete silos. I've seen some of that in Trombay, what they do with it and how they put it in canisters and do it. The actual space available to finally handle nuclear waste is not much. Maybe a football field for all your nuclear waste that comes out of your plants and everything else. And you then, tomb it, you entomb it really with a thing of concrete. So ways of management of nuclear waste, I think, is a very, very important subject which has not received the attention because we haven't really used that much ourselves and other countries as well. But as this goes and nuclear power and energy becomes important, though Fukushima has set back a lot of the nuclear plants because of the threat that nature provides us and the worry that it would contaminate. A nuclear plant can become like a nuclear bomb in some senses if you don't control it.
Thank you, Raj. I know you've been on your feet for close to 2 hours. We also have a memento for Mrs. Usha Chengappa. We propose that for the first time in this lecture series, we have the General's granddaughter, Amrita Chengappa, with us. Could I please request you, Amrita, to do us the honors? Thank you, Amrita. We want to take a moment to recognize the support of our patrons. Admiral Vijay Shekhawat, Rajiv, if we could have the slide up, please. Thank you. Former Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral V.S. Shekhawat, PVSM, AVSM Veer Chakra, who's caught up with a Mountaineering Foundation event as we speak and hence excuses himself, though he sends us his best wishes. On his behalf, I'm delighted to request an old Cottonial naval officer, Commodore Sarvate, to please receive the memento. And to present the memento, I'm equally delighted to introduce another eminent naval officer from Cottons, Commodore Karthik Subramaniam, NM, who's presently the Chairman and Managing Director of the Cochin Shipyard. I see both of them are seated together. I suspect they may have been on the same bench as well.